All right, everyone. Well, welcome to this APMM Model Maker Meetup. It's a joy to have you all here today. I'm the APMM's president, Michael Scribner. You'll also see Samantha Martinez, our executive director, on the line here. In addition, there's some board members here. If they want to wave or whatever, they're very selfless and awesome people that have made a lot of things possible in the last few years with the APMM. Including our kind of collaborations ongoing with IGMA. And I'd like to say welcome to all of you IGMA members as well. It's great to see all these people here today and making this a much richer and larger meetup. And so I will, we'll get right on with this because we got a lot of ground to cover. Our guest today that we are interviewing is Nell Corkin. Most of you, I'm sure, already know who this is, so she probably needs no introduction, but for those who don't, she is a president emeritus from the IGMA, the Hollywood effects model maker for many years, and also a fine scale miniaturist. And Nell, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right, well, without any further preamble, I will just go ahead and start jumping into some questions, I think. So, and I've got some images that Nell has been kind enough to send over. So I will be on occasion sharing screen. Maybe a little clumsy, I apologize. It's not something we do all that often, but we'll get through it. So, Nell, if you could tell us a little bit about your background, your hobbies as a kid, and what or who got you interested in making things.
Well, that's pretty easy. I don't know. I think I was born wanting to make things. The first thing I can absolutely remember making was a house made from a shoebox when I was somewhere between 4 and 5 years old. And it's been like that ever since. In fact, my mother told me when I was tiny, and I think about that same age, I got a hat making set as a Christmas present, and I sat under the Christmas tree making hats, would not come to dinner, would not move until I made every single hat, and then I burst into tears and had to go to bed. So we've all probably been there at some point. The first picture that I sent you is a picture of the dollhouse that I got for Christmas. That's dollhouse 1A. There it is. Yep, that's the one. Which my mother made for me out of cardboard boxes and wrapping paper and terry cloth towels for rugs. Can you get a bigger image?
Yeah, we can zoom in on it a bit. Yeah, there we go.
A little more.
Very cool. Is that just all wallpaper that was used to line all this through here, or something else?
Yeah.
Sorry, Michael, we're not seeing an enlarged picture. It's just your
it's just thumbnail.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I'm zooming in on it. You're not seeing that?
Nope.
Huh, weird. All right. Well, let me
you may have to actually open it.
How
Lisa
strange.
says you're sharing the wrong window, Lisa says. Don't know.
Yeah, let me go in here and
this is why I didn't do it.
yeah, right. Well, we will
like, why don't you do it, Michael?
Trial by fire here, I guess. Let's
That's right. The learning process.
Michael, right click on it and see if it lets you open it.
I mean, I've got it open on my screen. I think Zoom's just got too many screens to choose between at the moment. Just give me 1 second. I close some of this stuff. Try share screen again with, there we go. How about this?
Yes, you've done it.
Yeah, perfect.
Yay. Okay, just had too much stuff on the screen.
You wouldn't want to miss this. It's pretty basic, as you can see, but it said the photos dated 1949, so I was all of 3 years old.
Wow.
So it's plastic furniture, but anyway, as you can see, the stuff goes way back with me. A couple of years later, she gave me and my sister for Christmas a dollhouse her father had made for her in the 20s. And it's a fairly humble affair too, made out of orange crates. But this was the test to see if we were going to play with it and whether we were going to destroy it. And so we passed the test and so growing up, I worked on that dollhouse a lot. We redecorated it so many times, I couldn't even tell you. My other inspirations were dioramas. I saw at the Detroit Historical Museum when I was, I don't know, 8, something like that. And that's picture 1B. You can still find pictures of them if you look around the web. The one I shared yeah, there it is. And the dolls in those were about, I guess I should call them figures, were something like 10 inches high. So they were miniature compared to real life, but they weren't all that small. But I remember being fascinated by the water, because how do you do that? I wondered. It was a long time before I found out.
Cool.
My other big inspiration was the Thorn Rooms at the Art Institute of Chicago. I don't know if all of you will be familiar with that, but they were a series of rooms of interiors made under the supervision of Mrs. Narcissa Thorn in the 1930s. And they represent European, Asian, and American interiors. There's even a cathedral. If you've never seen them, they're really worth it. This is one of them. This is the Chinese chinoiserie bedroom. They're 12th scale. The detail is incredible. And when I was really little, I thought she had done everything, because naturally I assumed that she could. This was not the case, of course. She did design, and she found lots of little pieces for them, needlepoint for rugs and little decorative things. But she had craftsmen make the furniture.
Uh-huh.
And I was very disappointed when I was old enough to find that out. And all I had was a book of sepia photographs that my mother had gotten when she went to the Chicago Institute of Arts, God knows when. I didn't actually see them until I was in high school. But nonetheless, they're awesome, and they're worth looking for online. If you go to I always get the order wrong. Art Institute of Chicago, there we go, website. You can go into collections. You can see every single one of them, and they're totally worth seeing. They're amazing.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I thought I wanted to do that. I wanted to make room boxes. It never crossed my mind you could do this sort of thing for a living, because nobody did in the 50s and 60s. Well, nobody did. There were people who made fine miniatures. And we used to get a catalog called the Chestnut Hill Catalog, which had 12 scale miniatures. It was a group of artisans. I think some of them are retired people. Some of them were still working until very recently, who made beautiful, furniture and so forth. And that was my wish book for Christmas every year for quite a few years. Now the catalog is collectible.
It's just such an esoteric notion that people make this stuff, or to think that people would make this stuff professionally. I think that's, even in this day and age, I think it's an easy thing to overlook.
Mm-hmm.
The notion of models and prototypes and all that stuff as being something that is made by a full-time person and not just like, a hobby or whatever, So I think we still fall for that quite a bit as a society.
Yeah, I think we do. Well, art in general, especially in this country, is just starving artists is ha ha ha,
Right.
If you're an artist, there's nothing funny about that whatsoever. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah. We're lucky in the world of fine miniatures that we have shows that we can go to and meet collectors and let the public see our work and meet other artists, which is not true with most other art forms.
All right. I think that was the last slide for that question, wasn't it?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so the next question I had was, did you go to school for design, sculpture, or any other discipline that dovetailed into your craft experience or ambitions?
Well, my parents discouraged me from going to art school. They were very middle class, and I think they thought if I became an artist, they'd find me lying in the gutter, you know, someday. So I wound up being an art history major. And yes, that does absolutely, especially with the kind of miniatures I'm making, dovetail into what I do quite nicely. You know, when I need information, I know where to go looking for it. And since it's multidisciplinary, it just gave me generally a good background, good aesthetic background. So that was it. But I had no idea, as I said, that I could do this for a living.
When did you decide that crafting objects was more than just a hobby for you? Did you know it was how you wanted to spend your career or something you just kind of fell into?
Yeah, no falling into it. I went to my first miniature show sometime in the early 80s. And until then, I didn't know there was such a thing as miniature shows either. And it was just a revelation. And I was with my then husband standing at somebody's table, and she made these beautiful porcelain dolls, and I was admiring him. Being the person he was, we're no longer married. He said, well, you can make something better than that, you know, right out loud, right in front of her. And I wanted to drop dead. But she looked up at me and she smiled. She said, oh, are you an artist too? And I burst into tears almost, because somebody else thought of it as art. And because she was so darn nice. You know, we became friends later.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. But anyway, still, you know, you have to make a living. And I didn't really think I could make a living, and I didn't have any great ideas of what to make. So I was at the time, I was working as an appraiser, or a fine arts appraiser in Hollywood. And I was at somebody's house, and there was a thing on TV. I don't know if it was a special or what, about the making of Star Wars. And here are all these people making all the models for Star Wars. Well, all my friends were screenwriters and actors. And they're going, boy, I wish I'd written that, and so forth, you know. And I'm just going, how can I do that? So I had a friend who was an art director, and I asked him, and he said, oh, honey, never say that. They don't hire girls. They're all guys who went to art school together. They all know each other. You'll never get in. And I said, well, Kenny, why don't you come over to my house and see some of my miniatures? So I did invite him over. At the time, I was heavily into making miniature sushi. I was doing 12 scale mostly at the time. And he looked at what I had, and he got me an interview. And as I pulled into the parking lot, I said to myself, I'm not leaving here until they hire me. So I went in and talked to the head of the shop. It was Brick Price, who had Brick Price movie miniatures, and then it was Wonderworks after that. But anyway, so we talked, and he said, you know, well, thanks for coming in, you know, the usual, I'll call you. And I thought, not leaving. So I said, would it be okay if I hung out in the shop for a while and talked to the guys? And he said, sure, that's all right. So I did, and I was showing him my miniature sushi and some other stuff. And one by one, they disappeared into his office. And after a little while, Britt came out and crooked his finger and said, come on, we'll talk. So I went in, he said, well, how much do you want to start? And that was that. I never looked back.
Persistence pays, it seems.
Yep. Yep. Well, being an adorable little 30-something, you know, in shorts doesn't hurt.
Speaking of that, do you want me to go ahead and put up a couple of the images from question 4? You kind of segued.
Sure.
All right, let me see.
That shop was really known for space shuttle stuff. Large models of the space shuttle. They even did a full-scale interior of the space shuttle that Sally Ride said was better than the one they had at the place where they trained.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So lots and lots of that, but also lots and lots of buildings and landscapes. And I thought that you all would be interested in this. One of our big projects was going to be a video game for Atari, if you remember Atari. And this is long before we had the CG video games we have now. It was going to be shot with 12 scale models. And the gist of it was, you're in this weird amusement park at night, and this homicidal clown is trying to get you and you have to get him before he gets you. So we made lots and lots of kind of cool amusement park buildings, somewhat sexist, like the fun house just happens to be that busty blonde over there on the right. But this was like 1985 or something. And spent weeks and weeks at Raleigh Studios shooting this stuff. Unfortunately, before we were through, Atari was sold to another company who decided not to do the video game. So there we were. It's a sad example of an awful lot of work and an awful lot of time that wound up not being used. But if you go to the next slide,
yep,
it's a popcorn stand that I made for the Atari video game, which I still have, because the art department, when all this happened, sent the models back to us, saying we're not going to be such Grinches. It was at Christmas time, as to keep all the stuff you made. And so we all got to take home things that we worked on. And I was just fond of this. Amadeus was playing at the time, and it had a certain influence on the shape of the popcorn, I would say. Not entirely intentionally, it just kind of happened. But when you get back to me, you can see it's in my shop right now. It's over my shoulder. On the left. Right, left on the screen. Up, yep, up there. The top of the screen.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. You've also got you touched on this briefly, but I'll go ahead and bring it up here. It was the shuttle maneuvering pad. Let me see here.
Oh, that's you can see how small it was. I was even doing small stuff then. In fact, when you do movie work, you do whatever scale they need. And this was for one of the space shuttles. I made 2 of them, and they're the suit they wear to go outside the space shuttle and do things. Well, did at the time anyway. So the scale, I'm not 100% sure. It would be about, well, you can see the quarter there. It's like 3.5 inches high, I think. And it's made out of styrene and plexiglass.
That's very impressive.
And I did a lot of stuff. One thing about working in the movies was I learned to love plastic. There's a reason it's called plastic. You can use it for so many things.
Sure.
Yeah, and including something like that. After years, I moved to Apogee Productions, and Apogee was the company. It was founded by in Los Angeles by people who worked on Star Wars. So John Dykstra and Grant McCune and those folks. And it was a great place to work. And that's where I was working when the She-Devil pictures were shot.
Yeah, let me bring that up real quick for you.
It has me with my 80s hair working on a 1/4 scale house that then we blew up and it caught fire. And practical effects, right? These were shot in the Apogee parking lot, which is also where the Death Star trench shots from Star Wars 1 were shot. If when Luke goes down and is going to, okay. The only thing with doing stuff like this in the Apogee parking lot was invariably it would scare somebody in the neighborhood. We went around the neighborhood with flyers before we did it to let everybody know they were going to hear banging noises and maybe see smoke on such and such a date, but inevitably somebody called the fire department.
Now, I'm guessing you really only got one shot at something like this, right? I mean, you didn't make up extra models in case something went wrong. So
no, we didn't. And
must have been stressful.
Yeah. Afterwards, we always had gin and tonics, or depending on the era. We had the gin and tonic era, and then we had the beer era, the Corona beer era, after we finished something like this, because we were all coming down from the tenseness and the stress.
Oh, sure.
The high when it went right, of course, let's not forget. Because had it not worked, the producers would have all been mad and we would have had to build another one, and just don't
Oh
even.
yeah, the delays for that would have been crazy, I imagine, if you had to do that again.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah,
looks
yeah.
like you've got a
Sorry.
couple of shots from this was an earthquake themed. This wasn't from a movie, right? This was from something else. I'll go ahead and bring it up, but
It's something else that we did at Apogee was rides for Universal Studios. And this is for the Universal Studios in Hollywood. And they wanted a sort of more or less Hollywood Boulevard. You can see there's the famous record building and there's the Hollywood sign, which actually you wouldn't see from there, but never mind.
mhm.
But the thing with this model was that the buildings had to shake and fall apart in real time. And no problem building the buildings, right? But having them fall apart in real time, tricky. This is what it looked like after they had fallen apart and done all the terrible things. And it worked happily. It worked very well. What we finally came up with was using, instead of glue, instant milk powder, slightly wet, because we needed something that would, with just a little shaking, would crumble and fall in a realistic way.
Oh
And I know
geez.
they tried a lot of things, and that was the thing that finally worked.
Now, is that something somebody knew about ahead of time, like old, Hollywood trick, or was this something you guys figured out, on the
As
fly?
As far as I know, we figured it out on the fly, which was the beautiful thing about practical effects. And I think the thing that really kept it interesting for me, aside from the other things that kept it interesting, you had a new problem every day. It was very typical. So somebody would walk in on Monday and say, we need thing X, and it would be something no one had ever done before. Nobody knew how we were going to do it, and they needed it Friday.
Hmm.
And the amazing thing is, we would do it. And I can't tell you how empowering that is. You sit there thinking, I can't do this, but you can. And even now I have days when I'll think of something and I think, I don't know if I could do that. But in my heart, I know I can, because that's what happens. It was
All right.
truly amazing.
Now, moving into our next question was mostly about, some of the more effects heavy projects you were involved with. I'm going ahead and queuing up some images here. You've already shown us some right there, I think. But shall I go ahead and bring up the
Sure.
images for the next one?
Sure.
Let's see here.
We'll get to that for a bit. I mean, I worked on a lot of movies, and he did a little bit of this movie and a little bit on that movie. Little bits on Star Trek 2 and Gremlins 2. Spaceballs, we did pretty much all of Spaceballs, but I wasn't there for the whole thing. That was when I just started working at Apogee. Back to the Future 2.
Yeah, I think I got them out of order here. Let me bring up one of the other ones real quick.
Lots and lots of commercials, because again, if you wanted something a little strange, you couldn't resort to CG as we can now. You had to make it. And so some of you may remember the Duracell commercials with the little people with batteries in their Duracell batteries in them.
Mm-hmm.
We did tons and tons of those. There were 7-Up commercials for a while where the little spots were running, the red spots were running around sets, and we did those, that sort of thing. The Back to the Future ride that you were just on. That wasn't with Apogee, that was with Berkshire Motion Pictures, which was started by Doug Trumbull. You may know from Blade Runner and 2001, famous effects director.
Mm-hmm.
This is another Universal Studios ride, but this was for Florida. And it was tables and tables of 1/12 scale models that were supposed to be Hill Valley, where everybody lives in the movie. But Hill Valley in the distant future of 2015. Oh, well. So there was the courthouse square, which we just saw. Then there was this area, which was this very futuristic shopping mall. And there is the DeLorean, which is flying through the shopping mall. And then after the shopping mall, we had the residential area, which had some sort of things that never actually happened to real houses. But it was fairly straightforward. And we did everything, you know, the buildings, the landscaping, the trees. The trees were a technique I'd worked out with another model maker when I was at Britt Price's place, of using manzanita for the tree structure, and then gypsophilia for the leaves, and covering the gypsophilia with very fine ground foam. And we attached the gypsophilia with super glue. So for doing a big project like that, there was actually a room where we were doing it with hazmat suits on, connected to an air supply, so we wouldn't have to breathe all the fumes from the glue in the accelerator. And we were working away one day, and Peter Weir, the Australian director, was being shown around by Doug, and they came into where we were working. And I'm trying to be really cool and nonchalant, you know, and he says, wow, these are the best trees I've ever seen. And I said, well, thank you very much. And as I said it, I was gluing something onto the tree, and I glued myself to the tree.
Whoops.
I don't know if he noticed.
Well, anybody who's spent any time with super glue, I suspect we've all done it.
Oh yes.
Kind of a rite of passage, really.
Indeed. Indeed.
All right. Were there any projects you worked on that you think might be surprising to people outside of Hollywood Effects, like models in places people wouldn't expect to see them, or used in ways even other model makers might not realize? I'm thinking stuff like sculpted acrylic ice cubes in a Coke commercial, just really odd stuff people might not think of as being prototyped or modeled.
Well, the first thing that I did like that, I will never forget, it was a Nature Valley granola bar commercial. And the gist of it was the beautiful raspberries magically melt onto the granola bar, forming a delicious jam. Well, nowadays, I suppose this would be done with a computer. But at the time, what we had to do was take the Nature Valley people referred to it as the cookie, but the cookie part of the granola bar, not the jam. We had to make a mold of one, cast it in resin, insert a heating element into it, and use soft red wax for the supposed jam, and mold strawberries out of the wax, turn on the heating element, drop the strawberries onto the granola bar, and they would melt. And actually they did, and it actually worked. It sounds like they might bounce or something, but we worked it. But the funny thing was, one of the producers, they like to stand around on the set and have brilliant ideas, you know, and that you can then, of course, execute in 2 seconds. And he said, well, the raspberries look great, but they don't have any of those little hairs on them. Well, of course they didn't. And I said, well, yeah, but if they had the little hairs, then they'd be floating on top of the red jam as if someone had been shaving, and it wouldn't look good. That's why we did it that way. But anyway, that was one thing. Then we have the tulip. And something models have been traditionally used for is when you can't get what you want for whatever it is, you make it. And we were I think it was a wine commercial. And they needed this particular tulip that had to look a particular way and be a particular color. And this was at a time of year when there were just no tulips to be had. So we managed to find tulips at the flower market down in central LA. And we got tulips and made molds of the leaves and the petals and assembled a tulip. And there it is. And I would say we fairly well succeeded in making something that looks like a real tulip. It was an interesting process, though.
Very cool. All right. So what was your favorite aspect of actually doing Hollywood effects? I mean, if you had one takeaway from a career spent there doing that? What would be your favorite part of it?
Well, the problem solving thing that I've already mentioned was huge. And the other thing was the people I worked with. I mean, there are just amazing people working in special effects. So talented and so smart. And I learned so much. And it's a world where people are pretty generous too about sharing their talent and helping each other and supporting each other. When I first went into special effects, I was the kind of person who thought she had to go up to her little isolated tower and work all by herself so she wouldn't be distracted. And now I just really miss being in a shop full of other people. We had fun, and as I said, we supported each other. When somebody needed something from somebody else, they were there for you. It was great, and happily, I'm still in touch with quite a few of them. So that's kind of nice.
I always have to ask this, though some people don't like to answer it, so it's totally up to you. But what was your least favorite part about it? You don't have to don't go throwing anybody under a bus if anything like that. But
No. My favorite part was the hours. I mean, you'd have weeks of 12-hour, 16-hour days, and I couldn't do that now. Fortunately, I could then, but you'd get pretty tired. And the shop Apogee was in the valley. Well, so was Brick Price. And so I had to drive from West Hollywood, where I lived, every day to work. And I remember one night coming down Laurel Canyon on my way home, and I had a severe moment because I was so tired of jamais vu, if you know what that is. It's like deja vu, except instead of thinking, I've been here before, you think, where am I? And you're just, for a brief moment, you have no idea. And I thought, well, I'll just keep going. And it passed, but it was just from being tired. I mean, really, that's it. Everything else I pretty much liked, as I said, and I did not experience the kind of sexism that you hear about with actresses sometimes.
It sounds like it was pretty supportive behind the scenes and whatnot with your crew anyway. Speaking of behind the scenes, I was going to ask, what was your experience on movie sets like, as far as was it unique? From your perspective, was it unique compared to the other professionals doing different jobs on the set? I mean, obviously the actors, the front and center people are all going to have a very different experience than the people working on models or whatever, and the grips and the lighting people, all that sort of stuff. It's all going to be a different experience. But from your perspective, what was kind of unique about yours and the other model makers and effects people?
Well, people tended to be, or at least a lot of them, very interested in what we were doing. And we had a certain kind of respect because we were doing things that they didn't do and they really didn't know very much about. And let's face it, a lot of this special effects stuff is kind of cool. It just is. So it was, generally speaking, a pleasant experience. You did have to be ready for some director using what you just made in a way you didn't like. I will never forget the time we were some commercial or other. We made a beautiful Western, small town in the Old West kind of thing with a saloon and all the beautifully to scale, dusty street, the whole 9 yards. And this director started piling the buildings up one on top of another, like it was downtown Manhattan or something. I mean, there were porches hanging off the front of the building beneath it. And that's how he wanted to shoot it. So you just have to bite your tongue and not say anything. Because the director says I had two rules in model making. It's like, if it looks right, it is right, is rule number one. And and the corollary is, if the director says it looks right, it is right. He gets to win. Another experience that I sort of made me laugh when I was thinking about it was, unlike other people on the set, I had lots of hot melt glue burns from working underneath model tables with a glue gun and the glue dripping down on my hands and my arms.
I suspect that was a bit of an MVP tool on a movie set, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was pretty useful. It's not my favorite. Hot melt glue is not my favorite thing, but it certainly comes in handy.
All right, so at some point you decided it was time for a scale change in your career. What ultimately led you to that decision?
Well, I didn't really make that decision ever. I'd always worked in a number of scales, even when I was a kid. Um, but somewhere in the midst of my model making career in the movies, I had been to a miniature show and bought a resin 144 scale house. So it was supposed to be a Victorian dollhouse you could put in your dollhouse. And I decided I would finish and furnish it and put it on a table as if someone was working on it. So I did that. And I had it like sitting up on the top shelf of my workbench. And if I didn't go to lunch with everybody else, I'd work on it during lunch hour. So I was very intrigued with the scale. Basically what happened was with the advent of the computer, there just wasn't as much work for Hollywood model makers as there had been. And it happened fairly fast. I had moved to New York by that time. I fell in love, as will happen, and he was from New York. And I was doing model making work, mostly tabletop stuff in the city, off and on, sort of freelance. Then I was hired as operations director for a company that made toys for Burger King, a job I really, really hated in every way. So I started saving up my money. And meanwhile, I was working on more 144 scale. I think you've got a picture of that first one I made that says first 144. It's in a case. So,
Yeah, got it.
yeah, got it. Here it comes. There it is. You notice the dog has got one of the chairs. It's a little hard to see. There we go. So, when I did this, I thought, well, I can do better than that. So I was kit bashing N scale house kits. And I had 3 of them and I sent them off to a miniature show with a friend of mine. I didn't go. And she sold all of them. And I thought, oh boy, here I go. And so I decided to put together enough stuff for a show and do a show. And I started saving my money on my other job, so I'd have a financial cushion, which, believe me, when you start out doing something like that, you'll be glad you have. It disappeared. And I finally did my first miniature show in 1990. I think, in there somewhere. And it was successful, and I thought, well, I'm going to keep going. So I quit my other job, and here I am.
Now, you touched on this briefly a little bit ago, but just to elaborate a bit, the pace of work and the tone of the workplace must be very different moving from a studio with fellow model makers and large, gotta have it yesterday projects to your miniature work and private studio. Can you talk about that change and how it affected you?
Well, it has ups and downs. As I said, I miss my being with a lot of other model makers. That was just fun and education both. The other thing about working at home, I mean, on one hand, you can go to work in your pajamas, nobody cares. And I do. And in fact, I have been known to get up at 2 a.m. because I went to bed with something bothering me about what I was working on, and I can't sleep. And so I get up and just go in and fix it, which is nice. The downside of that, of course, is you're always at work. So it can be kind of hard to take a day off sometimes without feeling you should really be in the studio. And I still do have deadlines because I do shows. And like every other fine miniaturist I know, the last 2 weeks before shows are just dreadful. Long hours and lots of pressure. And then going to the show and hoping to goodness you sell something, because there are no guarantees. Which fortunately I was used to from the world of model making, because that was job to job too. You weren't hired as staff. So I was used to not having a regular income, but it can get a little tense once in a while. the internet has made things easier, and with COVID, a lot more people are miniature shopping on the internet and
Sure.
selling miniatures on the internet. And I think that's going to always be important, but I also hope that shows will continue because the networking is important, and it's a way to get the miniatures out in front of people who otherwise might never see them.
Sure.
You know, I know collectors who just walked into a miniature show because they happened to see a sign or something. And there really are not too many people who don't like miniatures. There are a few who just can't see them, but it's rare.
I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip a couple of my questions. I had a lot of questions to make sure we'd have enough to fill the time, but we're getting a lot of good information here, and so I'd like to leave enough time at the end for a few questions from the audience. So I may skip a few of these if that's cool.
Sure.
Let's see. In Hollywood, I imagine you undertook any project that your firm agreed to. Are you more discerning in the sort of projects you take on now?
Oh my, yes. Technically, I don't take orders anymore, but that isn't strictly true. I can be talked into things, you know, if it's something I really want to do. But what I won't do is, oh, could you make me another one of fill in the blank? I had one house, I by the time I made the 12th or 13th one, I said, never again. Never, 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 you know. Thanks, friend. It's I had breast cancer in 2016 and I'm fine. But it sort of brought home to me that we don't live forever, and I wanted to spend my time having my own dream and not somebody else's dream. You follow me?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Which was the reason I went into this in the first place.
Yeah. You tend to do pretty small quantity stuff then too, limited run type things, or you know, if somebody comes at you wanting like 15 of a particular thing, would you do that, or you want to do one or two and move on to the next?
Yeah. I if I do a room box, I'll usually do, you know, I'll cut several out, but I'll decorate them all different. Because I'm easily bored. Really.
No, I totally hear that.
And if you're bored, it shows in your work. I'm sorry, it just does. You know, if your heart isn't in it, it shows in the work. And I'm not going to go around making things I'm not proud of.
Well, and you're probably not getting up at 2 a.m. to go in and work on the 17th leg of a thing if you're, you know, you just couldn't be that into it at that point. So your work's found homes in a lot of private collections, but also in many museums in the US and Europe. Can you tell us about some of those places?
Well, one of the best places to see my work and really find miniatures in general is in Kansas City. It's the National Museum of Toys and Miniatures. And the woman who is one of the founders, Barbara Marshall, had a very discerning eye. And I know that because she was one of my first customers way back when. I didn't know who she was then. Just a lovely woman. And she has some of my best pieces. And she has some of Bill's, including one of his twin manners behind his head there. And work by just some incredibly talented people. This is also an excellent collection at the Kathleen Savage Browning Miniature Collection in Maysville, Kentucky, which is slightly off the beaten track, but so worth it. It's a gorgeous museum, and it has, as the Kansas City museum does, just really great work by some of the top 5 miniatures people there are. Another place you can go that where you can actually take some home would be the IGA Guild Show in September in Connecticut, and if you go to their website, you can learn all about that. And the Tom Bishop International Miniature Show in Chicago in April. And I have on my website, I have information if you click on shows, I have information about that. And also another show is the Good Sam Showcase of Miniatures, which is in California, if you happen to be on that side of the country. And it's in October. And I'm in the Tom Bishop show. I'm not doing the IGMA show this year. I probably will in the future. And I'm in the what did I already say? The Tom Bishop Show and the Good Sam Show. I'm not doing many shows anymore because I've slowed down and I've gotten older. And I'd rather put lots of time into things and not try to make so many. Okay.
All right. So I kind of wanted to take a quick look at some of your favorite pieces that you've created, like of your own work. And I think we've got some photos of some of that.
You know, something I will always be fond of is what I call the Vermeer house. It would be photo 16A. And I made it fairly early in my career, actually, for a collector. And it is a 3D version of the house in Vermeer's painting Little Street in Delft. And if I had not been having such a fight with my scanner, I would have pictures of the interior as well. But the side does open and there is a period interior as it would have been in the time of Vermeer inside the house. It required a lot of research, and my art history background came in very handy for that. And it also required, interestingly, a little adaptation, because if I had done it exactly like the painting, he had adjusted window widths and stuff to create a good composition.
Hmm.
To make it a real house, I had to change it to what a real house would be. So it was an interesting exercise in that sort of thing. Oh yes, then we have Animal House, which I made for another collector who wanted a house with a grumpy cat and a happy pug wreaking havoc. So I made a nice Georgian townhouse, and there they are wreaking havoc. The cat and the dog are by a friend of mine, Carrie Paiuti, who makes amazing 12-scale animals. That was big fun to make. I like things that have a sense of humor about them. Oh yes. Then the next one, I've made houses out of walnuts, which sounds very corny, I'm sure.
Maybe a
From the
bit more
very
nutty.
beginning. Yeah, I'm totally nuts.
Sorry, couldn't
I
help
call them
myself.
nut houses, which I really shouldn't, but I do. This is a very recent one, and I really, really like it. A friend who was closing their high-end craft store was using this piece of burl wood for a jewelry display, and they had some others, and they gave them to me. Said, "Could you use this?" And I thought, "Oh yes, I certainly can." So there's my walnut house. They all have interiors as well, and I do use some natural materials for these, obviously. Although I tend to avoid anything that will dry out and fall apart. I'm kind of fussy about that. So even the walnuts, I don't use as is. I paint them back to looking like a real walnut, so
Mm.
the color won't change. But those are real acorn caps. And the interesting thing about the nut houses, some people just love them, and some people just, ugh, too cutesy, I think. Then we have the pargeted house. Pargeting is a kind of decorative plasterwork that became popular in England during Henry VIII's reign. He had a palace built called Nonsuch Palace, and it was covered with plasterwork that was supposed to look like Italian marble, and he hired Italian artists to do it, and so then everybody wanted one. So if you had a tired old half-timber house, you could update it by putting this pargeting on. Well, I'm just fascinated by it. And it took me years to figure out, I'm not telling either, how to do it and make it look right. So when I made this, I was rather pleased with myself because it looks as it should look. It's something that's still done in England, by the way. If you go there, you can see houses similar to this. Although this is not a copy of any particular house. And then we have, this is something else I quite frequently do, is a house that isn't finished and is being worked on a table with tools and supplies to make something. And this particular one, the building was called La Fenêtre. It's a little building from Paris. It's wedged in between some other buildings. And it was a class taught at the IGMA Guild School that they have every year in Castine, Maine, taught by this revered miniatures artist named Noel Thomas and his wife, Pat, and who is also revered. And I made it for their fundraising auction. And I was kind of delighted with it. Actually, I had taken the class, so I knew what I was doing, and I had the instructions to copy, and I knew what tools we had used.
Mhm.
The tape in the front, the masking tape, we used to make things that looked like plumbing, like pipes, where the pipes joined together and so forth. You build it up out of masking tape. And I was very tickled by that. So I have somebody doing that on the front of the table. Anyway, and I have always admired his work. He makes very realistic 12 scale houses. They're gorgeous. He's retired. And so one of the greatest compliments I've ever had in my life was when he looked at that and he said, I couldn't do that. I almost fell off my chair. Of course, I said, yes, but you could.
Hey, Nell, excuse me, this
Yeah.
is Sam. I just wanted to mention that there was a question asked. Can you repeat the names of the museums you recommend?
Oh, sure. I want to get it right. I always get the words in the wrong order. Okay, the National Museum of Toys and Miniatures in Kansas City, Missouri. Kansas, Missouri. They have a website. And the Kathleen Savage Browning Miniatures Collection in Maysville, Kentucky. They also have a website, and they're also both on Facebook, so you can find them there. And do go see the Thorn Rooms. If you like miniatures and that doesn't inspire you, I just give up. Yes, and on my that's my website. Bruce was just putting that up. You can see more of my work on my website, obviously. Let's see. Where were we? Oh, favorite. Oh, and the last favorite piece would be the baby house.
Just 1 second. Here we go.
Yeah, this
Wow.
I've only made 1, 2, 4 of them. Each one is different. This is the one from the Kansas City Museum. And the cabinet was made by my friend Gilbert Mena. It was just, you're welcome. It was just a lovely craftsman. He likes to make sort of Baroque looking furniture, and that was perfect because what this is, I did the interiors. What it basically is a Dutch baby house. In the early 1700s, wealthy women in Holland and in England, actually, and in France, would hire a cabinet maker to make a cabinet, the sort of cabinet you could put in your living room. And when the doors are closed, it looks like another piece of furniture. But when you open it, here are all these wonderful little rooms. And they're called baby houses because baby was what was their word for doll. And they aren't necessarily 12 scale, but they're sort of 12 scale. So these are fun to do. And all the interiors are Dutch looking and of the period rather than just anything. I think now I just remember there's one in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts too.
That was very cool. I could spend a few hours just staring at that image, probably.
There's one thing about shows I have to say, and is you get to watch people react to your work. And it's wonderful, usually. You learn a lot. I especially like it when children come by the table. Their eyes get big.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's so cute. And they just, children look at things so intensely. They're really taking it in.
I'm guessing their parents are probably too busy panicking that they're going to touch something they shouldn't to
About
pay
right.
as much attention as they would like. All right. Well, skipping ahead a couple of questions here. If a person was interested in pursuing a career in Hollywood effects or in fine scale miniatures, what advice would you give to them for either path?
Well, okay. For Hollywood, number one, hone your skills, but really try to make some contacts. There are a lot of good model makers out there. Limited number of jobs. And in my case, for example, I don't know how long it would have taken me to get hired had I not had an in. Hollywood is all about relationships. And so if you can possibly find somebody or somebody who knows somebody they can introduce you to, it's a huge, huge help. It will get you a lot farther than just sending off your resume. The other thing is you have to be able to work well with other people. This is it's a collaborative art form. When I was at Apogee, Grant, who was my boss, had a sign with a shark up over the art department door that said, "No one is indispensable." And, you know, it was a lovely place to work and everybody was nice to everybody else. But if there was somebody who came and was a prima donna and abrasive, they were not asked to come back. It shouldn't be much of a problem. If I can do it, anybody can do it, because I'm kind of a hermit when I work. As far as fine miniature goes, same thing, you know, hone your skills, go to some shows, go to some miniature shows, even a small local one if you can find one. And meet people and talk to people. You know, I've had people show me things at shows that they made that were just amazing. And you'll get an idea of what people are interested in buying, how to show your work, where there might be a gap that you could fill with something that you do, which is what I did. There aren't many people who work in my scale. Networking is just a really good thing to do. And go look at museum exhibits, any place you can see other people's work too. That's always inspiring. You know, if I could have a dream workplace, it would be a building with lots of studios with other miniaturists in it, because there's something very stimulating about being around other people who do the same thing or do related things. And I know there are buildings where artists, you know, do that. So
Yeah, that kind of creativity and enthusiasm is kind of infectious.
it is. It is.
All right. Well, I have one more question I'd like to ask, and then we can pass it on to the audience to ask a few. I know we're running a few minutes late, but as long as that's not an issue for all of you, I don't mind running a few minutes longer so you can get a chance to interact with Nell for a little bit. But my last question is just the blank check question. If you had unlimited resources, time, and money to dedicate to researching and fabricating a single project, what would you build?
I found this question difficult because I'm in a happy position of being able to just make what I want to make right now. The only thing hanging over me is, will somebody buy it? And when I say that, my husband says, "Okay, how much inventory do you have, dear?" Well, I don't have any most of the time, except before shows. It would be nice to not have to even think about that, at which point I probably would want to do something that would require more research and more time to make. And one of the things that I've thought of doing is, I love half timber buildings, in case you hadn't figured that one out. And I would like to do a period one, so say the early 1500s, a manor house with accurate furnishings and the wall paintings they would have had and everything exactly right. And a parterre garden, formal landscape garden in a pull-out drawer. I made something somewhat similar for Chicago this year, but dialed down considerably without all the accurate period touches.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and hit that little raise your hand button and we can get you on here to ask. Michael, looks like you've got your hand up.
Hi, Nell. Great
Hi,
to see
Michael.
you. My gosh, you know, I've seen you at the shows as a fellow miniaturist for, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years, you know, and I've been exposed to your miniature work, but I really thank you for presenting your past lives. You know, it's really fascinating. I had no idea. And so thanks so much for opening that window. I really enjoyed getting to know you better.
Yeah, I could go on for hours, but everybody would go to sleep eventually. It was a fun, I used to say, it's the most fun you can have with your clothes on is working special effects. And I mean that, it really is. I look back at those years the way some people look back at high school or college. Just great affection and makes me smile.
A lot of emotional ups and downs in that, I bet. A
Oh,
real
yeah.
roller coaster time, I would imagine.
Yeah, there were days in the magic works, and there were unfortunately some days when it didn't. We haven't talked, and we won't right now. But I can go on at length.
All right, any other questions from anyone? Looks like Stuart has a question, and then we'll get to Scott. I see, where does 3D printing fit into your miniature work, if at all?
I had a feeling that was going to come up because it is the wave of the future. I think there's no doubt about that. First, it was laser cutting, and everybody was doing where it fits into it. At the moment, I'm not using much of it in my work. I'm not opposed to it at all. I think it's great. I haven't seen too many things that would work for me for various reasons, surface texture being one of the problems. But I know over time that will go away. I know it will. So I'm kind of waiting for that. It's very big right now in 1/4" scale miniatures, which is another whole branch of miniature collecting, 1/48 scale. And with that, first it was laser cutting, and now it's 3D printing. So, people who want, say, a Windsor chair and can't do wood turning, can buy a 3D printed Windsor chair with turned legs and that sort of thing. Where it will fit into the world of fine miniatures, I think remains to be seen because it's early days. When I was an art appraiser and giclée printing was starting to come in, there were lots of questions about how to value it. It's not original exactly, but and on it. And I don't think that question's ever to this day been totally resolved. I mean, but yet, from my personal point of view, being able to design and do 3D printing is definitely an art form. And as we move into the future and more things become mechanized, I think it's going to have a place. I'm just not sure what that is. The people who do fine miniatures now do it the way I do. I mean, if we had time to talk about my favorite tools, they're all hand tools, except for my 10-inch variable speed disc sander, which I literally couldn't live without. And I think we're just on the cusp of what's going to happen with that. And I honestly couldn't say. I hope that's what you wanted.
If you want, I can go ahead and bring up that image for your favorite tools. We could touch on that real quick.
Yeah,
you'd like.
Well, that first one is, and if everybody doesn't die laughing, it really is my favorite tool.
We're talking about the chopper.
Yeah.
All right, let me share that.
Because I do an awful lot of building with strip styrene from Evergreen and Plastrock, bless their hearts. And I have to cut multiple pieces the same size pretty frequently. I devised this little goodie for myself. This is a tool called the chopper, which you can get from a model railroad company called Northwest Shortline. And it does not come with that Incra ruler on it. I taped the ruler to the chopper on the 3-inch mark, and I made a little stop that you can see there, very high tech. So I can cut multiple pieces exactly the same size that are very accurately measured. And I use them to the point where I wear them out. And someday I'm going to pay somebody to make me one that is not made out of aluminum. Because the problem with the chopper is the arm bends and it's made out of aluminum. You have to keep in mind. But anyway, I use it every day, constantly. And then the next slide is the Incra rulers, which I'm sure a lot of you already are well aware of, but they are beautiful things. And they're my favorite marking tools by far. And they have that nice matte finish, so they aren't glaring in your eyes when you're under a nice bright light and you're trying to see where the measurements are. And they have holes so you can mark them if you have a thin lead automatic pencil. Love them. The little square is very accurate. I can use it as a square when I'm feeling lazy. Just wonderful. And then a variety of hand tools. Just the next slide.
Uh-huh.
Which you'll
Coming up.
like. Nothing too exotic with the hand tools. Foley style tweezers. X-Acto knife. I like that one because it's not so likely to roll off the desk and land in your thigh. Above them are flush cutting tweezers that Micromark started carrying, and I noticed they always seem to be out of them, so I think other people must like them as well. And then above them is a little razor saw and miter box from Micromark. And when I do get really thin, like cove moldings and so forth. And that is the perfect tool for cutting really thin, delicate materials. I highly recommend it.
Very
You can
cool.
change the grades.
All right, so I think Scott L had a question. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask.
Yeah, it was related to something you already answered about technology, but let me expand just a little bit.
Sure.
I was a model maker for Hasbro toys for years and years, and then I got into design school support. But along the way, I had some objections to how 3D printing was used, and of course, everyone's been up against like it's the answer to everything, and it's not, you know.
Nothing
You
is.
just have to get over it, you know. Keep your eyes open. But I did a lot of milling of wax, machine wax to make molds for plastic parts. And I was able to control the resolution a lot that way on very small things, you know, little 10,000ths of an inch ball mills and all that stuff. And my brain attached to it to have milling strategies that made sense. Do you have anybody that does that kind of work for you, or do you ever capitalize on that kind of technology with anybody?
I've never had a need for it actually. So no, I pretty much do everything myself. I do occasionally do chemically milled brass parts for what I do. I do the artwork and I still have to send it off to England now. I couldn't find anybody in the States who was interested in doing it. It's such an old-fashioned thing. But I find it extremely useful for certain kinds of furniture. No, I'm not opposed to it. You know, if I have to have somebody do my resin casting for me because after using it for years, I developed a furious allergy to the resin. And so I can't do it myself anymore.
Me too. That happened to me.
Too, yeah. Oh,
Hives and stuff from the urethane.
yeah. So it's just probably just as well because it's quite toxic, and doing it at home, you know. But I like resin because it preserves the details. And I have yet to see 3D things that really do that to the level that I would want it for my work. But as I said, I think it's probably going to come. It will probably happen. Maybe not. Maybe the technology doesn't permit it. I'm not sure. But I have not seen anything that I would use. And I'm always looking. Yeah. If you see anything, let me know.
Yeah, they're definitely getting better resolution on some of the, you know, like DLP machines and things like that. Just there's different ways of going about generating the layers, and some of them are way better at very fine layers than, you know, for the detail like that. But even the best of them still are, for the scale that you're working, you'd see everything. I mean, it's like it would be pretty crazy, even to this day. As you say, it may get there someday, but we're a ways off still, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, any other audience questions? Now keep in mind, there's a lot of people in here. I may not necessarily be seeing all of you. So if you're raising your hand, but there is a button you can hit under reactions that is actually a raise hand button, and that will move your little thumbnail up to the front of the line. So I'm not currently seeing anybody with a question.
There's one. That's a thing.
Yeah, it looks like a thank you. And thank you,
Somebody
Tori.
saw me saying.
All right, well, we're 15 minutes over, and it looks like, we seem to have answered all the questions and everything. Oh, that's applause, it looks like, from D. Taylor.
If anybody has a question they think of later, you can contact me through my website, and I'm also on Facebook under my name. You can PM me. I'll be happy to answer it.
Well, Nell, I really want to thank you
Well-
for taking the time to reminisce with us and talk about your career and your thoughts on craft and whatnot with us today. Means a whole lot to us, and I hope you all who've spent the last hour with us, we really appreciate all of you showing up to hang out with us as well. There will be a recording of this if anybody wanted to go back and access it later, listen to it again, or pick up some of those details as far as the museums and whatnot. It'll be hosted on the APMM's website, and that is modelmakers.org. And again, thank you all for your time and for sharing this hour with us, and hope you all have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye now.
Thank you guys very much, all of you.
Thanks again, Nell.
It was fun.
We'll